Greetings and welcome. My name is Adam Neiman. I'm the Artistic Director of the Manchester Music Festival, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this spotlight interview with pianist Warren Jones. Warren, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you and to get to talk to you today. Of course, our patrons are sad that we couldn't produce an in-person festival this year because of the pandemic, but our patrons can look very much forward to 2021 because Warren Jones, as well as the full cast of singers that had been booked to appear in 2020, are able to come back in 2021. So if the COVID gods will cooperate with us, we will be able to have a night at the opera next year. So Warren, thank you for being able to be so flexible with us.
Thanks very much for re-inviting me. I'm looking forward to being there again. I have a great time always when I'm in Manchester and up on Stratton Mountain, and we're going to have a great time next year. We have a wonderful cast of singers, and it's going to be a great time.
Absolutely. Warren, let's go back to the beginning. Would you tell our patrons where you grew up and a little bit about your early studies as a pianist?
Where I grew up? Well, I came onto the planet very near the White House in Washington, D.C., and just like 10 blocks down the street from the White House. And we lived in the Washington area until I was late 4, and then we moved to North Carolina, where I started piano lessons when I was 5. I was a little bit of a terror as a child, so my mother had to really shop me around to several different teachers. Everyone said no, and finally one woman way out in the country said that she would take me on. And I started studying with her, and she is, by a weird happenstance, my only living teacher at this point. All the others have passed away, but my first piano teacher is still alive and doing very well. Her name is Ethelene Carter, and she lives in Thomasville, North Carolina. And she's a delightful lady. She still comes to concerts. If I play anywhere in that area, she is there at the concert. And it's always a joy to see her. I switched, I went to another teacher when I was in the 6th grade, who was the lady that, as far as I'm concerned, actually taught me how to play the piano physically and everything. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, I am incredibly grateful for my time with her. Her name was Bess Gale, Gayle. Mm-hmm. She was a student of Ernest Hutchison at Juilliard, and because of her physical limitations, she never had a concert career. She had polio as a small child. She had severe scoliosis and what in those days was called crippling arthritis. Mm-hmm. So that her hands were bent at the most bizarre angles, her fingers were. And the thing I'm grateful for, is the fact that she taught me to play the piano without ever playing the piano for me. She sat across the room and knew what I needed to know and what I wanted to feel like, literally feel like. And she would say, that sounds good, what does that feel like? And she taught me to recognize sensations in my body as well as what I was hearing, but more importantly, sensations in my body physically that were aligned with good piano playing.
That's incredible.
It's an amazing thing. So that I have to tell you a story. When I went to college, to undergrad school, in my first lesson, I opted, believe it or not, to play Opus 118, number 6 of Brahms. Uh-huh. What a way to start, right? And there were 2 pianos room, but there had been 2 pianists in the room in North Carolina because if we had concertos or something, someone would come and play. My undergrad teacher, sat down and said, Warren, play the G flat major section in the middle a little bit and try it a little bit like this. And he sat down and started to play. And I said, why are you playing the piano? And he said, well, he was a very shy man. He said, well, sometimes I play, and I said, it's my lesson. Wow. I get to and we were off and running.
That must have been a kind of awkward moment, actually.
but it's because no one had ever played the piano for me.
Yeah.
In situation. They told me what to do and I played the piano. But the idea that someone could actually play the piano in my lesson was entirely foreign to me. But now I've gotten used to it. I have to tell you, when I teach, I play very little.
Interesting.
Because I'm intent on the student at hand, experiencing and finding what it is for themselves.
Right.
And knowing their sound. Sometimes I might show a little something about, how to produce a tone or something like that and just talk to them. But I don't, I play very little. I don't know if how are you when you are teaching? Are you playing little or a lot or what?
It depends. I do find that if the student is a little bit more advanced, for example, sometimes it's helpful to demonstrate things that are quite subtle to talk about. If it's a very subtle type of pedaling indication or, a specific tone quality. But I do find that with more basic principles, I'm often showing by just showing in the air or talking about sensation the way you're discussing in order to get the message across. But it's interesting, Warren, that you had a teacher like that, because I had a very similar experience. Not quite to the extent that you did, but my first teacher had a stroke, actually a couple of strokes prior to the time that I knew her. Her right hand was completely incapacitated, and she also had that terrible crippling arthritis, but she would only demonstrate little bits with her left hand for me, and so much of what we talked about was very much like you're discussing, the sensation, when it sounds right, what did you do, all those kinds of things. That's really, we had that in common. That's very interesting.
It's very good. I mean, when I tell some people, like for example, that you have to have the sensation of your arm hanging from your shoulder. That is something that I learned in the 6th grade, and it's self-explanatory to me. I mean, it's second nature. And I'm always surprised that there are some pianists who have never been asked to have that sensation in their body of their arm just hanging there with its weight and letting it work.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed when I watch you play just how natural your physical posture is. You seem very at ease at all times when you're playing. You never seem tense or, tightened or anything like that. You just seem nice and loose and relaxed, and your tone quality really penetrates across distance because you are so in touch with gravity and with the piano. It's really wonderful to watch.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that. I'm always taken with, again, going back to that same piano teacher, Mrs. Gale. She said, Warren, relaxation is a certain way of fallacy, because if you're really relaxed, you're basically limp. And she said, so you can be relaxed, but you can't be tense. She said, you have to be supple. Supple, like flexible strength is what you want. She said it is very like swimming. That swimmers are very strong, but they are not grabby strong. They're movable strong. And that's what you want when you play the piano. It's exactly like swimming. And I've always thought that was a great analogy, for that. The idea of movable strength.
Yes. Yeah, I was talking with pianist Craig Shepard a couple of weeks ago. Do you know Craig, by the way?
I've met him, but I don't. He's not a friend, but I've met him, and yeah.
Yeah, we were actually talking about a similar topic. We were talking about flexibility. I was asking him, and of course I'll ask you a little later on about your philosophy of teaching. And it seems like we're already touching upon that quite a bit. But we were discussing that flexibility goes hand in hand with strength in playing at the piano, and I think that's very much what you're discussing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So Warren, our audience, of course, knows you in a certain capacity, right? Because our audience watches you produce our Night at the Opera concert as well as curate our vocal workshop, which is such a success. And so you're known very much as a vocal collaborative pianist, but also your career is extraordinarily broad, and you play a great deal of chamber music and you play solo music. So talk to our audience a little bit about how your career became what it is and how the different pathways of your career sort of formed.
Well, when I can tell you that when I went to undergrad school, I went to school at New England Conservatory in Boston. when I went there to school, I intentionally tried to train myself simultaneously for 3 different tracks. One, I would say, and they were not in any particular order. There was the question of teaching eventually, there was playing solo music, and there was making music with other people. And I took courses that at the school, I had a fairly wide range of possibilities. I took things that would encourage me in all of those different ways. For example, in order to, if you're going to play with singers, you have to do languages. And so for the 4 years that I was at New England Conservatory, each year I had 2 language classes. I was studying either, advanced French and beginning Italian, or beginning German and advanced Italian, or, and I also took a very fine poetry course so that I could learn a little bit about how to read and analyze poetry in English. And so by the time I was like a senior in school, it had become clear to me that I really didn't like all those hours in the practice room that it takes to be a solo pianist. I mean, it is a very lonely life.
Yes.
It's very solitary. And I like people, even though I'm extremely introverted. I like people, and I like to be around people every now and then. And I thought, well, so let's take solo stuff off the table for right now. I continued my degrees in solo piano, which I did, but as a career goal, I took off. And I said, and teaching, I'm younger than most of the people in college right now, so teaching is something I can come back to, but making music with other people I can do right now.
Yeah.
So let's see what we can do about that. And that's where I began to concentrate. And again, I tell my students and I tell people that I'm mentoring, I think the fastest way to a career is to discover what you are really good at, not sort of good at, but what you are really good at. And emphasize that in your approach to your career at all costs and above anything else. Because in the music business, you have to not only get the door to open, but you have to shove your foot in and just do what you do better than anybody else, and do it until you are just blue in the face.
Well, now, to play devil's advocate, it sounds to me like you are a very self-aware person. So maybe you were able to assess very accurately what your strengths were. But I wonder if you could talk to those students out there who might be watching this, who don't have a clear picture of what they're truly good at. They enjoy various things, but they're not quite certain. So how can they go about making that determination so that they can focus their careers?
I think that's a great question. I mean, for me, maybe it's because of stuff that's happened in my life, because from an early age, I've had several traumatic experiences in my life. And I learned a long time ago that you can never take tomorrow for granted. That you have to do today what you love to do and what you can do best. So if I took a combination of what I love to do, which was making music, and then weighed the reactions of other people to those activities that I do, I can, by that way, I can sort of define in a certain way what's good for me. Because if people are saying, you're a phenomenal teacher, you should teach, well, you have to listen to that. If they're saying, you play Liszt ballades better than anybody in the world, then you have to beat people over the head with Liszt ballades. And it is, of course, that's predicated on the fact that you love playing Liszt ballades.
Of course.
But probably, if you're playing them well, then you love to play them.
Probably.
I mean, that's a great thing. I mean, it's never into Liszt ballades, but other people are. Thank you, God. I think you are, actually. For example. But anyway, it's a combination. It is a little bit about being self-aware, but it's also a combination of being self-aware and aware of the reactions that you get in an informational way.
Yeah. Did you have a mentor as you were in college? Obviously you had your teachers, and teachers are mentors, but did you have anyone in particular that you really leaned on for emotional support or to give you an objective reaction to an idea that you had for a career path or musically?
You mean, are you talking about like an older established person?
Perhaps, or could be a colleague too.
I would say I probably had musicianly, I had probably two mentors at the point where I was grown. I mean, my teacher, Bess Gale, the lady that taught me to play the piano, she was the mentor of the highest order, the highest order. And I was a child. I didn't know what I had, but I just remember taking it in, and it's astonishing to me how often her words come back to me, and I say, that's what she was talking about. And this is like 55 years ago. And I remember her body language or her reaction to something, or something that she said. And so she was a great mentor for me. There was also a voice teacher at New England Conservatory, Margaret Hoswell, who one of the most important people in my life. I mean, Margaret had a way of, she was a wonderfully good voice teacher. She had a way of including me in her voice lessons so that I learned about singing in a different way than most people know about singing, and what to hear and what to imagine, because she got me to imagine what it can be, and with a modicum of technique, your imagination becomes reality.
True.
But having someone that asked me to imagine what it can be, it was very important. And then the third person was probably my grad school piano teacher, Milton Salkind in San Francisco, who simply, he allowed me to see what I could do and not back away from it, just do it.
Yeah.
Go and do it.
Fearless, right?
A little bit of that.
Yeah.
Because up to that point, I have to say, for example, Adam, I never lost a competition until I was in grad school. I never lost one.
Wow.
And I take that back. I lost one competition in high school when I was a senior in high school. But Milton's whole idea about, as well as Mrs. Gale, their whole idea about winning and losing was crucial to me, because both of them got to understand that music is very much a game like golf or like bowling, in the sense that there's no defense, nothing you can do to impede your colleagues even if you wanted to. You cannot impede them, right?
Right.
All you can do is do your best game and see how it stacks up.
That makes sense.
And the only way that you can lose in that proposition is if you have not given everything you had.
Indeed.
You give everything you can give, and then whether you win the contest or not is irrelevant, because you will win because you were out there giving everything you could give.
Yes.
And you can be satisfied that day I won for myself.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. In fact, my teacher in high school told me that. She said, I asked her when I said, and this was before I lost the first contest, I said, Mrs. Gill, what do I do when I lose? And she told me exactly what I just said. She said, Warren, if you do your best every day, she said, not perfection, you have to be excellent every day, you will never lose. You will always walk away a winner.
Yeah.
And that's amazing advice.
True, that's sage advice. Now, you frequently serve as an adjudicator, speaking of competitions. You serve as an adjudicator for many international competitions. You recently did so for the Van Cliburn competition. You've done so for the Metropolitan Opera audition. So,
I have to say.
well, so what, when you are serving as an adjudicator, What are your criteria that you're listening for in a young artist?
Well, I can tell you one thing that Claude. Did you ever know Claude Frank?
We'd met several times, but we never worked together.
Yeah. I asked him. He was on the jury at the Clarinet when I was on the jury. I mean, I was a kid on that jury. I was like 20 years younger than anybody else. But during a break one day, I said, Mr. Frank, could I ask you? I said, you do this all the time. I said, can you tell me about what you do? He said, well, Warren, he said, yes, I do a lot. He said, but it's very simple. You know, the first question I always ask myself is, do I ever want to hear this person play the piano again? And he said, it's usually, well, maybe, or sort of no, or whatever. And if the answer is like that, then I don't need to think any further about it. He said, if the answer is yes, then I start thinking about why I want to hear that person play the piano again. Because, and I didn't know it, but subconsciously that's what I do. Because the question of why I want to hear the person play the piano again is not about whether I agree with what they do.
Right.
But rather, do they have a vision? Do they have an imagination? And are they carrying that imagination out in the performance?
Yeah, and I would imagine, Warren, that you probably laterally apply that to your selection of colleagues. So when you decide to work with someone and perform or record with someone, I would assume you're looking for that same catalyst of inspiration and creativity. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. You know, I like to have independent-minded colleagues who bring their ideas to the rehearsal, and I bring my ideas to the rehearsal, and no one runs the rehearsal, but rather we play the music and we see what's there. And I don't know how you are, Adam, when you are preparing, because, you know, I never have talked to you about this, but part of my preparation is not only to get some idea about how I want the music to go, because, you know, I don't listen very much, hardly ever, to recordings.
Yeah.
That again has to do with how I grew up, because we didn't have a record player. We didn't do anything to reproduce music. The only way I learned music was for me to play the music and figure it out. I never heard, I mean, I had my first record player when I was a freshman in college.
Wow.
And my first record was D minor Mass.
Oh, and you could do a lot worse.
Remains the top piece in the world as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, I figure out what I want to say, but I also try to figure out every week that I could say it.
Right.
And then go to the rehearsal, my colleagues want to do. And a lot of times I will be presented in the rehearsal with some idea that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
And I go, that is great, let's do that. You know, let's try that out and see how that works.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say to me when they hear me play something, they say, I never thought about that piece like that. Let's try that again, because they like what I'm doing. You know what I mean? And the ability and the willingness be open, accepting in the rehearsal, and listen. That's crucial to what we do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I prepare similarly. I always try to prepare as many options as I can, because when I walk into a rehearsal scenario, I want to be ready to dance with my partners, and that might mean responding to something totally unanticipated. So I might practice things in a variety of tempos. I might practice things with totally different interpretive approaches, maybe even opposite approaches, just to see, can I do it convincingly these different ways? And so, yeah, for me too, when I walk into that rehearsal, if somebody surprises me with a point of view I'd never thought about, I'm always delighted, because for me, making music is all about that in the moment production of sound.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's amazing. So Warren, I'd like to ask you if there was a pivotal moment, or perhaps a series of pivotal moments, that opened the doors for you to working with singers of the highest caliber? Because, I mean, anyone who reads your resume sees the top singers of the world are your regular colleagues. And that's not everyone's path. So how did you find that path, or how did it find you?
Adam, that's a sort of a difficult question for me to answer, because some people would like to lay that at the fact that I play the piano well, or that I play the piano better than anybody else that does this. I have never thought that was true. I play the piano well, but there are a lot of people in the world who play the piano better than I do. That's just what it is, right? There are a lot of people who know more song texts than I know. There are a lot of different things. The thing that I was able to do when I started working with singers was I have always enjoyed, knocking on wood here, I have always enjoyed really very good health and a fairly good amount of concentration and endurance. Because when I first started working with singers like this, I was working first at San Francisco Opera and then at the Metropolitan Opera. And I was working full-time at the Met and doing concert tours, which, believe me, was not easy. There were a lot of days where, for example, the morning after my debut at La Scala, the morning after that debut, I had to be back at the Met to play a rehearsal of Flying Dutchman. So I played the matinee in and got on the plane overnight and showed up at the Met at 10 o'clock in the morning to play.
That is crazy.
That was the only way I could do it. But I did it, and it worked. But there are a lot of things like that where I think the blessing that I've had with good health and concentration and endurance has made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I try to play as well as I can. That's what I can say about that.
No, that makes sense, Warren. So, I mean, go on.
And one more thing. The other crucial thing about making music with people is that the overwhelming amount of ability that it takes to make music with people are, in fact, people skills, not musical skills.
Yeah.
And I have always been able to get along with people. So, I get along with people. I don't know what that is. I've had people say things to me that were unpleasant and stuff like that, and I just walk away because it doesn't really make any difference.
Right.
That's fine.
Yeah. Well, people love you, Warren. I mean, not just our audience, but of course singers whom I speak to. And I mentioned Warren. Oh, I love Warren. Everybody loves Warren. You're just a beloved figure by everyone.
Well, I don't know but that, I'm sort of a hermit, but whatever. It's okay. I'm glad.
Warren, when you're working with a young singer, great talent, beautiful voice, maybe not a ton of experience, is there a checklist in your mind of things that you prioritize that you want to make sure that those singers take away from the experience of working with you?
Yes. I don't know if it's a checklist, but I can tell you that with just about every singer that I've ever encountered, they have a great deal of insecurity. And their insecurity is very well founded and well placed. You and I play a machine that sits on the stage and waits for energy to be put into it, and that machine is actually that. I don't know if you were thinking this way, but the machine is actually a translation device, in modern terms, of our energy. We put our energy into the machine, and the machine reacts in that way. Okay. Yeah. Now, and we can touch the machine, we can hear the machine. We have a very sort of outside of our body relationship. Singers are working with a thing they are working with something inside their body that they cannot see, that they cannot hear, that they can feel, but the feelings are not always what you expect them to be, right?
Right.
They have no idea what they look like when they're singing. There's this huge list of reasons for them to be insecure. And so the crucial thing that one has to do with the singer is to know the place where you can teach and criticize and show things that need to be improved, balanced with the necessity of their self-confidence so that they can stand up and sing. And I always want people to walk away from working with me believing in a fundamental way that they can sing and they have a thing to say and they know what they want to say and they can say it.
Warren, that's beautiful. That's a really beautiful way of putting it.
It's a very difficult balance to learn, I think, because I see a lot of people, a lot of coaches who are super critical and correct. I mean, they're correct. They're not criticizing for criticizing's sake. But if you fail to recognize where someone is deflating because of your criticism, especially a singer, if you fail to see that, you are on a road to bad results.
Right. Absolutely.
And likewise, you cannot just prop someone up and tell them that everything they do is wonderful and that you're going to be fabulous in public, because that's not working either.
Right.
But learning that balance is a little bit bitchy, to be blunt.
No, it does make sense. I have thought about it. I mean, I don't think I've ever put it in such beautiful terms as you described it just now. But it has occurred to me that as a pianist, not only the fact that we play on a box that translates our emotions and our thoughts, but the fact that even our profile is the only thing really exposed to the audience. We're not actually looking at the audience while we make music, whereas a singer or a cellist or a clarinetist is looking straight out at the audience, and that must be a very different experience.
Well, I have to tell you something, Adam. When I was a kid, I sang gospel music as a child from when I was 7 until I was about 13 about 13. But my sisters and I had a gospel trio. I played the piano and sang tenor.
Wow.
And I was the MC. I was always the spokesman for the trio. I learned how to face the audience because I could not sing to the piano. I had to sing out in this direct to the public, and so they could see my face, and everything had to be by memory because there was no way to look at the music, so it was just all memorized. Now, when I don't know how old I was. I must have been probably maybe 45, I suppose. I don't know. I really don't know I don't know when this was that this happened. The tenor in a quartet of singers that I was coaching with the Juilliard Quartet for a performance at Carnegie Hall canceled at the last minute. Now, this was a very special project that was being done where I had done an arrangement of the 7 Last Words of Christ of Haydn for string quartet and vocal quartet.
Wow.
And they couldn't find another tenor to sing. And the management at Carnegie Hall called and asked if I would sing in the performance.
Wow.
And I thought about it for about, there was a few seconds. You know how you can think very fast when you need to.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, let's see, if I sing badly, everyone will say that, well, he's a pianist and he saved the concert. And if I sing even halfway well, people will say it's a miracle. So I'm a winner. So I took on the job of standing on the stage at Carnegie Hall to a sold-out house, 3,000 people, on Good Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and sang with the Juilliard Quartet and Benita Valente and Jan Di Gaetani and Thomas Paul.
Wow, Warren.
But the reason I tell you that story is, Adam, it was astonishing to me. That was the first time since a child that I had stood on the stage in a concert and faced the audience. Mm-hmm. That part of the reason why I accepted to do it was exactly for what you're talking about, because I wanted to remind myself of what they feel, of how they feel and how they're doing it. And it was the most wonderful afternoon, I have to say. I had a great time.
Yeah.
But it is an entirely different way of making.
It really is.
It's totally different.
And I remember the days when I used to have more hair on top of my head, and sometimes it would fall a little bit in front, and I couldn't, when I would be playing, I wouldn't even see the audience, not even with my peripheral vision. And so I think pianists can have that insular experience where they feel that they're just by themselves in a room, which is in a way quite liberating and comforting. But I would imagine that every time a singer or a violinist or a clarinetist has to go out there and see the bright lights just blinding them in the face and the audience, you really never get away from that feeling of connecting with the audience, which has its pros and its cons, of course.
Right, absolutely.
Warren, one of the things I love so much about your performances for MMF, besides the incredible music making, which goes without saying, is your ability to speak about music. We're talking about music now, and it's wonderful, but also the way you describe the works on a program, the way you set the stage, the way you set up plot lines. It's not just informational, but it's dynamic and it's charismatic, and it really, I think, enhances the audience experience. So I wondered, is that something that's generally very important to you? Do you do it solely for the benefit of MMF, or do you generally speak to audiences in that very open and transparent way?
I like to talk to the audience. I think I probably do a little bit more of it at MMF because of the nature of the concert and stuff like that, and the fact that there are not translations and stuff like that in the program. Mm-hmm. I think a little bit of that, Adam, goes to the fact that I have always been drawn in vocal music. While I like Wagner and I like Strauss and all of those people, a lot of times that particular genre of music concerns people who are more than human. Mm-hmm. And Italian music and French music almost always is telling the story of real people in real situations, a lot of times in real time. Mm-hmm. And I want the audience to understand that these people who are on stage, it's very much like what is said in the beginning of Pagliacci, in the prologue of Pagliacci, where the baritone says, these people in front of you are flesh and blood. They are human beings. They are not ideas from some mind. They are standing in front of you as humans, singing and as human beings would. Mm-hmm. That type of music has always appealed to me, and I always love it when I can enlist the audience in understanding that this is a real thing you're watching. It's not some pie in the sky elite something. It's real people standing there experiencing real emotions. Yeah. And so for that reason, I like talking. Yeah. But I like playing the piano better.
Now, as someone who wears so many hats as a performer, soloist, chamber musician, vocal collaborative artist, teacher,
and conductor.
We're going to get to that in a moment.
Okay.
Do you make a distinction between genre when you are playing? So let's say you're working on a Schubert song, or you're working on a Beethoven Archduke trio, or you're working on an operatic aria. Are you taking the same approach to music making, or are there factors that affect the way you interpret the music because of the genre they belong to?
That's a very interesting question. The thing that my brain goes to immediately is the question of rhythm. Mm-hmm. Again, I've talked to string players. I say, I just ask them, or I went through a period where I was asking string players, so where do you feel, where is the point of rhythm in your body? What's going on? And eventually I got down to the idea that there's rhythm in their left hand on the fingerboard, and but there's also rhythm at the point of contact, the bow and the string. And there's a combination of those two pieces which define rhythm. They're not in their navel, it's not in their ear, it's not anyway, it is on the string and on the fingerboard. And we as pianists, we feel our rhythm tips of our fingers.
Yeah.
At the contact point of the keyboard, we feel our rhythm. And then we have another whole set of rhythms going with our feet.
True.
Which are not always aligned to the rhythm on the keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally an ear coordination thing. But singers have, again, this weird, their rhythm is entirely in the front of their mouth. Because that is where they feel their articulation with their lips and their tongue and their teeth, that they articulate and show what they're doing. It's also in the speed of their vibrato. Right. But in any event, again, they can't reach in and touch any of those things.
Right.
They can't do any, they have to have it all from the inside out.
Yeah.
And so rhythm sometimes is of a more gentle nature than a really hotshot fiddle player who is really feeling very exact movements on the string, or a hotshot pianist who is feeling his fingers on the keys.
Yeah.
So people have a different sort of sense of how they deliver their rhythm.
Right.
And for me, it's a very fascinating thing. For example, do you know the Debussy trio for harp and viola and flute?
Of course, wonderful piece.
When you think about Debussy's ability to put three so incredibly different ways of making noise together, and writing it so that their rhythms can mesh and all of the things can feel organic, it's unbelievable. Or you can think, if you get with pianists, you think about the clarinet trio of Beethoven.
Yeah.
The trio is the same thing.
Yeah.
We have entirely different ways of expressing ourselves, and how does that work? And I love being the pianist because you're literally in the middle of all of that exchange.
Yeah, same here. I love that feeling of, in a way, being the anchor sometimes between disparate groups, because in some ways, a flute or clarinet is really far away in tactile sensation from that of a cello.
Right.
But somehow the piano can act as that intermediary body between to kind of link things together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. I've never heard anyone describe it that way, that each of us has this place where the rhythm takes place. I really like that. I want to think about that a lot more, actually, because I've thought about it in other terms. For example, I'm always fascinated by the way musicians of different instruments view the markings on the page. For example, articulation, how short or how long a note is, or an accent, how much you accent or what kind of accent, and where the accent takes place. And when you talk to a string player, they have, in a way, more tools sometimes than a pianist does to achieve certain kinds of stresses and to achieve certain kinds of articulations. And so it's really fascinating to me, when a French horn player looks at a tenuto mark, or a cellist does, or a pianist does, they have three completely different ways of interpreting what that means. And, I always ask the question internally, does the composer understand who's going to be reading that mark? And did the composer understand how to get across the message? Or is the composer writing in a kind of uniform language for everyone that needs a lot of interpretation? I don't know how you feel about that, whether you think the score is a really good representation of composer intention, or if you think it needs, tons and tons of interpretation.
I think it very much depends on the composer.
Yeah.
Very much. There's some people were cognizant of those questions, I think, and you can just examine the score and see that some people really weren't.
Yeah, it's true.
But I was wondering, in that way, have you played the Dohnányi Sextet, the Opus 32 Sextet?
Yes, in fact, I recorded it. I love that piece.
that's a perfect example of three choirs of people, three happening, and they call it a sextet, but it's actually three duets. And it's like, whoa, how did he put all this stuff together?
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Well, that's just genius in a way, right?
Can I make a side comment about the whole issue of having a broad-based experience in careers?
Yeah.
If you think about what I said earlier about how the way to get your foot in the door and to like jam it in up to your knee and then eventually step into the room is to do one thing better than anybody else. I mean, I really believe that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you're in the room, you have to start doing other things. Because all those other things, playing chamber music to me with string players is way different than playing chamber music with wind players. And it is way different than playing a vocal recital.
Mm-hmm.
And it's way different than playing a solo recital. But the important thing is that every one of the skills from every one of those activities informs all the other activities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's necessary, if you're going to be a really good, complete musician, to do a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
And get around as much as you can. I believe career-wise in commercial music business in America, that tends to happen later on in your career,
mm-hmm.
after you're established.
Right.
You know, it's the same thing with singers. Singers, you know, if you're known as a Mozart singer, you can enjoy being a Mozart singer, but you have to press yourself out of that mold and see how it feels to sing other things.
Right.
Because you're a Mozart singer when you have sung other things.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because singers in particular find, I think, that their voice and their style tends to lend itself very well to a certain area, and sometimes people tell them the opposite. They tell them, no, don't do these things because it's going to overtax your voice or it's going to push you in the wrong direction. And I wonder how a singer makes a healthy determination, you know, as to what kind of advice they're getting. Is this good advice? Is this bad advice? I remember hearing Pavarotti interviewed once. It was very much toward the end of his life, and he was asked, do you have any regrets? And he said, the only thing I regret is that I didn't learn German better, because I would really have loved to have sung Wagner, which totally blew my mind. I couldn't even imagine Pavarotti singing Wagner, but I found that really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. You could remember Wagner's main man was Bellini. and I mean, the end of Tristan is the same, the Liebestod is the same chord progressions in the same key as the end of Norma.
Oh, wow.
And you know, Wagner came out of Italian music. And so a lot of times really good Wagner singers
mm-hmm.
are those people who allow themselves and are able to develop those skills that Wagner requires, which are different than Italian singing.
Yeah.
But like Flying Dutchman is a totally Italian opera in German.
Mm.
And if you get someone who can sing Eric with a beautiful line, the tenor part,
mm-hmm.
it's like heaven. It's heaven. It really is.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I love old recordings. I'm a fan of many of the, you know, really old recordings from the 1910s, 20s, 30s. And of course there's some wonderful vocal recordings from that age. And I have heard some recordings of Wagner that stem from that period, and the style of singing was so different from what you hear now in terms of Wagner singing. And at least to my ears, and I'm not as sophisticated as you are in this genre, but to my ears, it definitely sounds more Italian in the style of singing. And I wondered if that was because it had a closer link to the original style of performance.
It could be. There's a lot of different reasons why that could be happening.
Yeah.
A lot of times, remember, if Italian singers sang the music of Wagner in those days, they sang it in Italian. You know, everyone just expected that you were going to sing it in your language.
Right.
You know,
right.
No. Crepuscolo degli Dei is the way they listed Guerrero in Rome until fairly recently, and they would just sing it in Italian because that's what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And the music works.
Yeah, it totally does. So, our audience had just heard one of our MMF Revisited broadcasts. They just heard last Sunday our Night at the Opera from 2018, which was a really magnificent performance with an incredible cast and a wonderful program. And they have to look forward to this coming Sunday. They're going to hear the vocal workshop recital from 2019. Now, I just want to state for the record that Warren deserves so much credit for having really formed a vocal workshop that I think is so beneficial to the young singers, and it brings together in close proximity our opera cast for Night at the Opera with our young singers that are coming. So, Warren, in the future, what can our audiences look forward to in terms of maybe future innovations with the vocal workshop, or things that you really enjoyed about that 2019 workshop that you want to revisit in any way?
Well, I can just say that I think the way I would answer you is this. Making a program for a workshop like that is basically assembling a bunch of pieces of a puzzle. And I'm sure you do the same thing when you make the festival program. You assemble a bunch of pieces in a puzzle, and then you see on the paper, on the page, or on the table, how do the pieces fit together? Mm-hmm. Because, for example, the first thing I do is to ask the singers, what would you like to do? Mm-hmm. And then I usually have a small list of what I think they might do well mm-hmm. from their audition. But then I also have to think about the pianist who's going to be playing for them mm-hmm. and what the pianist is going to get out of this and how they're going to do. And given the wide variety of possibilities of the wide menu that's available, it's almost always possible to put something together that's interesting.
Absolutely.
But I'm always wanting the people who are there in the workshop to be singing something that they are going to carry away in their heart as an important milestone in their development. Mm-hmm. And I also want the audience to walk away from the performance knowing that they heard something that was important that day.
Right.
And whatever that is, if that's Tosti songs, or if it's a Wagner aria, or if it's, I could say Come to Jesus in whole notes, but I don't believe we're gonna have anybody singing Come to Jesus in whole notes. E flat major, but I don't know. No, anyway, I'm kidding. So that's how I do that, and I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. It does.
That's what I'm anxious to do.
Absolutely. Well, we have really wonderful singers for next year, as I mentioned before, and really excited to get live performing back in business. Of course, the whole world right now is on hold when it comes to live performances. Warren, have you been really negatively affected by the pandemic? Are you safe and sound? Are people you love safe and sound?
Well, I'm safe and sound. Mm-hmm. I have lost some colleagues to COVID already, and I've had several students ill. And believe me, these students were healthy mid-20s people who were knocked on their rear end for an extended period of time. And, when they write to me and say, do not take this for granted, don't take this lightly, this is not, because, I'm sorry to say so, Adam, but I'm your daddy. You know what I mean? I'm old enough that I don't have to work anymore if I don't want to.
Gotcha.
I still want to play, but I could just sit around and sort of pontificate and teach a little bit and do stuff like that. Almost all of my jobs have been canceled, and I'm expecting the ones that aren't canceled so far to be canceled. So, but I'm waiting. I'm biding my time and practicing, and I'm trusting that we're going to get back to some kind of performing. I don't know what that's going to be, but
yeah, we can only keep our fingers crossed that it's sooner than later.
exactly. And really the main thing is to stay healthy, as far as I'm.
Absolutely. Warren, you have an extensive discography as a recording artist. Are there any projects in the works that you can tell us about that maybe will happen? Of course, if live performance and recording can happen sometime soon, anything that we can look forward to in future releases?
Well, one of the things that has not been canceled yet is a recording next month in August, which will be, I'm going to participate in a recording of a lady in New York whose name is Sheila Silver. Do you know her?
I don't.
She has just recently retired from the composition faculty at Stony Brook.
Oh.
And she has asked Sidney Outlaw, who was the baritone on the opera evening, she has asked the two of us to record 3 of her songs on this composite recording of her new songs. And I'll be honest with you, Adam, I have not made my career playing new music. I have played premieres and done stuff like that, but that's not where the bulk of my work has ever been. But songs are really very good songs.
Wow.
They're interesting poems. They are interestingly set. I'm looking forward to it very much. I have no idea when she will release something like that because she's having to do it in sort of drips and drabs when she can get people together at a safe space, at a safe distance, and so that everything is right and no one's in danger about anything.
Absolutely.
But I'm looking forward to that very much.
We will look forward to hearing that. And I promised to talk a little bit about your conducting work because that's so cool that you do it. So when did you start conducting, Warren, and what kinds of things are hopefully in your future for conducting?
Well, let's see. I don't know when I started conducting. I've been around conductors all my life, probably because in high school I was the pianist for the chorus in high school, and I've just done things like that with conductors all my life. And at a certain point I decided that I would like to try it myself, and I put the word at love to come and conduct. People asked me to come and conduct. And so I've done a few operas. For me, it is. For example, I conducted a performance of Knoxville Summer of 1915 one evening in California, which was fun. Another reason why I wanted to do it was that thing what I said earlier about how everything informs everything else.
Yes.
To hear wonderful orchestration in front of you like that, in front of me, has only hear how things are delineated in the orchestra has heightened my sense of voicing when I play the piano.
Explain voicing to our audience, because some of our audience may not understand what you mean by that.
Well, voicing has to do with my recognition of what I want to hear clearly. Like, for example, we can play several voices at a time. We can play one voice at a time. We can play 2 voices at a time. We can play 3 or 4. We can do a lot of we're multitaskers. We can do a bunch of stuff, and we pedal at the same time. And voicing is bringing out one of those lines above the others so that the audience hears the basic acoustic relief that we want to hear. And I've always thought, maybe it's just my training, Adam, I don't know. I mean, Hutchison, the teacher of my main teacher, came from that Liszt and Leschetizky school of teaching, which was about voicing. It was a great deal about voicing and pedaling. And so I've always been concerned with that, and the ability to bring something out clearly to the audience in counterpoint or in dynamic or whatever, however you do it, that's what voicing is.
Yeah.
And being in front of the orchestra, for example, if you play Don Pasquale, the tenor in the beginning of the second act is one of the most celebrated trumpet solos in opera. And to hear how Donizetti outlines this melody that the tenor is going to sing in just a few minutes. He's going to sing the entire melody, but first it's played on the trumpet. And to hear how the trumpet works with the strings makes me go back to the piano and play in a different way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, if you play, for example, I mean, I know you have played Dvorak Quintet a lot. If you have a really good viola player in the slow movement, it changes how you think about that music.
Yeah, for sure.
Because of the viola ability to come out of the middle of the texture and be the star.
Yes, absolutely.
I've always wondered, what is it about middle movements in large quintets like that the violist always gets the thing? I mean, in the Elgar Quintet, they have a huge solo. In the Franck Quintet, huge solo.
Yeah, you're right.
What is that about?
Well, I think it's good taste. I think I have to say, I think my favorite instrument in the string family is probably the viola. And I think that sentiment was shared by many composers. I know Mozart preferred the viola.
Okay.
I know that, well, of course, Frank Bridge was a violist, a very fine violist, and his quintet features beautiful viola lines. Dvorak was a violist, so of course, so I think that might have something to do with it.
And even Beethoven. I mean, Beethoven's instrument was viola, right?
Well, he played violin. I think he probably could get around the viola, but I'm not sure to what extent he was competent on the viola. But yeah, you're right. But it's in the middle of everything somehow. I think composers gravitate towards getting away from the top and the bottom all the time and bringing out things inside the textures.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Warren, I can't thank you enough for your time today. It's such a pleasure to chat with you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been delightful to talk to you as well. I think my phone is ringing.
All right. Well, I should probably let my audience go, but again, I can't wait to have you back next year. Can't wait to hear your future recordings, and stay healthy, my friend.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.